Hello everyone, my name is Beth Ferris. I'm a senior fellow at Brookings and co-director of the Brookings LSE project on internal displacement. And we're here to have a conversation about the escalating humanitarian crisis in Syria with a particular focus on refugees and internally displaced persons. I'm here with Jana Mason from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees here in Washington. Welcome, Jana. We're glad to have you.
Thank you, Beth. Very happy to be here.
And with Tiffany Lynch, who's a senior policy analyst with the U.S. Committee for International Religious Freedom. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thanks, Beth. I'm happy to be here.
The three of us, together with another colleague, Sahar Chowdhury, recently traveled to Lebanon and Jordan, looking particularly at the situation of Syrian refugees and IDPs. Some of us went to Lebanon, some of us went to Egypt, but we're here to talk today about some of the overarching things that we found. Jana, why don't you start and tell us what are your dominant impressions from our travel in Lebanon and Jordan?
Wow, one dominant impression. I guess the dominant impression, unfortunately, is that this crisis, the refugee aspect of the crisis, is just overwhelming. I think we heard that from a lot of people we met with, that it was the nature of the crisis was tremendous, that resources were being strained, they didn't know what was going to happen. And I think you asked the question of everyone we met, what's your best case scenario? And they all said status quo, which is a little bit troubling for a refugee situation. So I guess just the overwhelming nature of the refugee crisis, the fact that there were so many tremendous needs that weren't being met. But to be a little bit hopeful, I think one other dominant impression was that a lot is being done. Governments and communities are being very generous. So at least there's one positive aspect to it.
Thanks, Jana. And just to put this in perspective, Syria has a population of 18 million people, of whom 4.5 million more or less are internally displaced, and another 1.6 million outside the. 1 out of 3 Syrians is displaced inside or outside the country. What about you in terms of Jordan, where we saw one of the largest refugee camps in the world?
I have to agree with Jana. My immediate impression is just the sheer numbers and size and scope of this crisis. It's just unmanageable now, I think, and unsustainable in the future. You have 500,000 refugees in Lebanon, 500,000 in Jordan. The Zatri camp where we went in Jordan, it's the 4th largest city in Jordan.
Are camps the answer? Should we be moving toward more camps? 80% of the refugees aren't living in camps.
I don't know if camps are the answer. I think you have to find a way to meet the needs of the refugee populations. You have to find a way to provide assistance to those people who come with nothing on their backs, food assistance, housing assistance, but at the same time help those communities who are just deluged with this massive influx of a population.
I think the camp issue is really interesting, and it'll be interesting once this crisis is over to see what we've learned, if anything, about camps, because from UNHCR's perspective, for the past number of years, we've been trying to move away from camps. Not just us. Right. A lot of our partners recognize they breed despair. You know, they're not a great living situation. But the irony is sometimes camps provide a bit more protection and assistance than in the host communities. I mean, living in cities or host communities, at least refugees can live a little bit more of a normal life. But if they can't access assistance, if it's too far away, if it's not available, if they don't even know how to get it, then it's a difficult issue.
Well, all of the refugees in Lebanon are living outside of camps. What were some of the particular needs you saw in those horrible informal tented settlements?
Absolutely. Not just that they're living outside of them, but that they're so dispersed. I think somebody told us that there were 14 different areas of Lebanon where people are living, and some of them are renting substandard apartments, some of them are living in unfinished buildings, unused schools, some of them are in these what you call tented settlements, which are made out of not even tents. Tents, I think, would be an improvement. One of them was living under a billboard, I think we saw. So really terrible situations. And that raises a host of not only assistance issues, waterborne diseases and health concerns, but a lot of protection issues as well, because children can't be monitored, and we don't know what kind of aid is flowing in or out. So protection and assistance concerns.
What about Egypt? Are things a little better in Egypt?
They're a little better, I think, just because the numbers are more manageable. You know, as I said, 500,000 in Lebanon, 500,000 in Jordan, but only 80,000 so far in Egypt. But
a much bigger country.
A much bigger country, but they're expecting 200,000 by the end of the year. You know, people who can't afford to live in Lebanon or in Jordan or in Turkey, they're now running to Egypt because they think it's cheaper, they could access more services there. So the next major influx, I think, is going to be Egypt. And how do you prepare that country?
It's a good point. I think we both heard from refugees in Jordan and Lebanon that they or people they knew of were thinking about going to Egypt because they had heard the cost of living might be cheaper,
Right.
or they just...
But it's not, too. And, you know, there's just, they can't afford these countries, so they look to see where they can afford, and they think they can afford Egypt. But again, housing is very expensive there. Access to services, as we discussed, they're in remote locations compared to where refugees live. So right now, Egypt, it's seen as a better situation, but they're going to face the similar problems there.
I mean, I think overall displacement is massive, it's dynamic, people are on the move. I'm particularly concerned about those displaced within Syria. And you see the numbers are huge, and most people are moving 3 or 4 times to try to find safety. I remember talking with one refugee who said, my village had 17,000 people, and now there's 1,000. You know, when this thing is over, there'll only be dogs and cats in Syria. I mean, that's a grim prognosis for what might happen in the country, but it's certainly awful.
And as we heard in many of our meetings, the battle for Damascus is yet to come. So
what does that mean, the battle for Damascus?
So the fighting is still going to happen, and maybe some of the most serious fighting is going to continue. And where do those people go?
Right. Well, they cross the border if they can. If they can't, they stay within Syria displaced.
And I think one of the trouble things we heard was that even when the battle for Damascus, you know, may occur, and even if and when there's a solution to the current situation in Syria, that the violence and the displacement may not end with that, because there may be a secondary wave, possibly of sectarian violence happening, which would cause more people to flow out. And even if things are peaceful in Syria, it's not ready for people to go back anytime soon. I mean, as you said, villages destroyed, infrastructures destroyed. These people are going to continue having needs in the region for a while.
What are the main pressures facing the host governments, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt?
I think the main pressure so far is just being able to economically and structurally, in terms of services, provide for these individuals, but also how to tamp down on maybe resentment towards Syrians coming in and using services.
And that resentment's natural when people come and stay for an awfully long time and access services that may no longer be available to citizens of those countries.
We heard about jobs already being scarce, water being scarce, a lot of services being unavailable even to the local population. I think
housing prices increasing because competition for housing.
I think in Lebanon there's also an additional danger, given that Lebanon is very insecure in a lot of ways, and that the fighting is literally spilling over across Lebanon's borders. And some of the host communities are very concerned with the violence that this war is bringing into Lebanon in a fragile political climate already.
So the refugees causing economic, social pressures, fleeing in desperate situations, causing security problems in the region. Unfortunately, this is a situation that's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And I think that we need to respond both to the humanitarian situation as well as continue the search for a long-term political solution. Listen, I want to thank you both, Jana and Tiffany, for joining me today. And I'm sure that we'll have further occasions to talk about the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Syria. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.